There are moments in the history of our planet when silence speaks louder than any catastrophe. Moments when the Earth inhales deeply, withdraws into itself, and something ancient awakens beneath our feet, something that has been sleeping since before our collective memory ever existed. While we argue about warming, storms, and imminent collapse, there is another murmur, deeper, older, a return. The return of the primordial cold, of the great white stillness, of the glacier that watches. My name is Arthenox, and this is Cloaked Mysteries. Today, you and I are not descending into the center of the Earth but into its rhythm, its pulse, its geological breath. And once we understand that, we will understand what is truly coming. The Earth exists within a delicate cosmic region known as the habitable zone. It is not just a stretch of space around the sun, it is a whisper between extremes, a narrow pause between fire and absolute void. Here, water can exist as liquid. Here, molecules meet, bind, and remember how to live. But this calm has never been a permanent promise. It is a balance, and balances shift. While Mars is now a silent desert, it too once had oceans, rivers, storms. It too was blue. It once moved with winds that carried stories across its valleys. But its atmosphere thinned, dissolving, fading, becoming too light to hold warmth. Cold did not arrive first, absence did. The absence of embrace. The absence of retention. Heat escaped. The planet cooled. And everything fell asleep. We now live in a world that holds warmth through invisible gases. We cannot see them, yet they shape our existence. The greenhouse effect is not a human invention, it is an ancestral mechanism, as old as the birth of the oceans themselves. Without it, this world would be an icy sphere, silent and empty, reflecting sunlight instead of holding it. Just as the human heart keeps heat within the body, the atmosphere keeps heat upon the Earth. But history has never been linear. Across eras too vast for human memory to comprehend, the planet has oscillated between intense heat and overwhelming cold. Tropical forests once covered regions that are now frozen plains. Penguins once walked where immense trees once stood. Mountains were seas. Seas were desert. Nothing here remains. Everything pulses. Everything returns. Everything goes. And then one day, something changed. Oxygen began to fill the air, and methane, an ancient keeper of warmth, disappeared. The planet exhaled, and, in the silence of that breath, the world froze. For the first time, ice took everything. Not just mountains or poles, but entire continents. Earth became a white sphere wrapped in absolute quiet. The great glacier had awakened. This event was not a mistake. Not a coincidence. It was a rhythm. A cycle. A deep, constant heartbeat in what we call geological time. And just as the heart pulses, Earth pulses between warmth and cold, between expansion and retreat, between life and stillness. And that pulse is beginning to change again. There are records carved into stone itself that tell stories older than any human myth. Layers pressed beneath the weight of oceans that no longer exist. Crystals formed under pressures no living eye has ever witnessed. And within each one of these layers, there is an echo, a signal, a trace of the planet's great respiration. The Earth cools. The Earth warms. And then cools again. During periods the human mind would call impossible, glaciers stretched all the way to the equator. They were not simply pale smudges on maps, they were walls that swallowed entire continents. The surface reflected sunlight back into space, and the Earth withdrew into itself, like an animal hibernating before its next awakening. Nothing moves quickly on the scale of the planet, but everything moves with purpose. When cold takes hold, it is not merely physical. It is structural. The oceans change. The winds change. Currents stop feeding the rain. And with time, life responds. Plants shrink. Animals migrate. Patterns vanish. New ones begin. The glacier does not simply reshape the world, it resets it. It writes a different name across the surface of the Earth. But these glacial eras were never uniform. Between them, there were brief intervals, small windows of warmth, where life flourished with almost desperate intensity. Forests advanced. Seas widened. Species appeared in bursts of evolution. The Earth does not crave stability. It is a living organism, in constant transformation, always in motion, always preparing its next act. Then came an especially gentle interval, a warm pause. In it, our hands, our cities, our stories began. We assumed this interval was normal, that this mild climate was the default state of the world. But this period is only a sigh, a short breath, an exception. We were born between two great ages of ice, not between two ages of heat. And now, the planet is breathing again. Not quickly, not violently, but precisely. Currents shift, winds drift, ancient ice shifts in silence. And the great glacier, dormant, seems to stir, reminding us that Earth's story has never been linear and has never been about us. Around 2.5 billion years ago, something quiet and transformative occurred. Simple microorganisms living in the vastness of the primordial oceans began to produce oxygen as a byproduct of their own existence. A gesture so small it could have gone unnoticed, and yet, its consequences reshaped the fate of an entire world. The atmosphere changed. The planet changed. And the heat that had once been held close escaped. Methane, the ancient keeper of the Earth's warmth, began to vanish. It was transformed, oxidized, dissolved. Without it, the planet had no way to hold heat at its surface. The seas began to cool, the air grew thinner and more transparent, and slowly ice began to form. First at the poles, then on mountains, and eventually everywhere the wind touched. The surface became a mirror. Sunlight, instead of warming the Earth, was thrown back into space. A natural feedback loop, a mechanism as old as time itself. The more ice formed, the more light escaped. The more light escaped, the more ice took hold. The planet entered a deep sleep, a white silence, a world encased in crystal and solitude. This great glaciation was not brief. It did not last centuries or millennia. It lasted hundreds of millions of years. Entire generations of life were born, evolved, and vanished beneath a pale sky of frozen stillness. To us, it would mean the end of everything. To the Earth, it was merely a chapter, a pause in the endless respiration of a living world. But ice does not reign forever. Deep within the Earth, the internal heat, the molten core, began pressing upward again. Volcanoes ruptured the frozen crust. Ancient gases returned to the air. The balance shifted once more. Slowly, the ice withdrew. The water melted. The oceans awakened. And life exhaled its first hopeful breath again. When the world thawed, it was not the same world that had frozen. Not just physically but spiritually. It had learned to die and return. The Earth recognized its ability to erase itself and begin again. And most importantly, it discovered its rhythm. A rhythm that endures even now. A rhythm that is beginning to speak once more. There is a widely believed idea that the last ice age ended around 20,000 years ago. But that is a half-truth shaped by the way we humans measure time. We do not live after an ice age. We live inside one. The deep cold never ended, it merely receded. Like a wave retreating from the shore destined to return. The glaciers that stretch across the poles are not remnants of a frozen past, they are the living edge of a process still unfolding. They breathe. They advance. They retreat. They fracture. They rebuild. They are not monuments. They are organisms. Beings of ice that respond to wind, to ocean warmth, to the turning of the Earth. They are alive and waiting. When we look at maps of the past, we discover that lands now inhabited by millions were once buried beneath miles of ice. Ancient peoples walked across frozen bridges that connected continents. Colossal animals roamed white horizons that today we recognize as rich farmland. We are the children of a brief interval, a warm flicker, a spark between two vast nights of ice. The average temperature of our planet today is still low, very low. Even with the heat we create, even with warming oceans, even with cities blazing like campfires against the cosmic dark, we are still far colder than the ages of overflowing life that once existed here. The world we call normal is not normal. It is a pause. And this pause is fragile. The ocean currents that distribute heat across the globe can change. They have changed before. They can stop. They have stopped before. When that happens, ice advances. Not over centuries, but over decades. One generation can watch forests disappear, seas freeze, and cities raise walls against eternal snow. The Earth does not ask permission. It simply breathes. And when the planet inhales cold again, the world changes without asking us if we are ready. Everything we call history, empires, agriculture, writing, cities, myths, wars, science happened inside a window of stable climate that was never guaranteed. The pause. A moment of truce in the long march of the glacier. The ice retreated for a brief instant, and in that interval, we learned how to plant, how to domesticate, how to build, how to dream, how to tell stories about who we believe we are. If the planet had inhaled cold just a little earlier, perhaps we never would have existed. If it had exhaled warmth just a little later, perhaps we would have arrived too late. We are the result of a delicate coincidence, born between titanic extremes we hardly recognize. We grew up believing the world has always been this way: green, breathable, gentle. But that is not true. The world simply allowed us to stay. Our first settlements rose as glaciers withdrew and fresh rivers spilled across young soils. Wheat sprouted only because the ice had uncovered ground once locked away. The earliest human paths formed along corridors where ice had melted. Even the idea of a border is a memory of water returning after ice. Our civilization is a scar left by the passing of a glacier. But we forgot. We forgot that the cold returns. We forgot that nothing here is permanent. We forgot that the planet does not live on our scale, we live on its. And now, we speak of warming as though we are witnessing the climax of all climate change. But warming is only one side of the oscillation. The faster heat expands, the more violent the cold's return can become. The Earth does not act in haste, but it acts with precision. We are a species that built its world on the belief in constancy. But constancy never existed. The Earth remains as it is only until its own pulse signals that it must change. And when that pulse shifts, civilization learns what it truly means to be small. There is an intuitive, almost childlike belief that heat is the opposite of cold, as if they were forces that cancel one another. But on the scale of a planet, nothing is that simple. Extreme warmth can carry within itself the seed of returning ice. The more the great ice caps melt, the more liquid water spreads across the surface. And the more reflective that water becomes, the more sunlight is cast back into space. Warming can be a prologue, not a destiny. When the great ice layers melt, they reveal lands that have not seen sunlight in millions of years. Winds shift, tides shift, currents shift. Ocean currents are the veins of the planet. They distribute heat like blood. If something interferes with them, slows them, diverts them, or stops them, heat stops circulating. It gathers in pockets, and the rest of the world plunges into a sudden, unforgiving cold. The planet can burn and then freeze. Past climate cycles show this pattern again and again. It is a natural mechanism. The pulse. Ice withdraws, life blooms, heat intensifies, currents change, and ice returns. What we call a climate crisis may simply be the opening movements of something the Earth has done many times before. Something it will do again. We are merely present to witness it this time. People imagine cooling as something slow, gradual, glacial in the literal sense. But the opposite can be true. Climate shifts can take place over decades, sometimes over years. When balance breaks, it does not rebuild politely. Climate does not negotiate. It reorganizes. And in that reorganization, humanity has always been a spectator, never a conductor. The warming we see now may be the last warm exhale before a long white quiet. We do not know when, because the Earth does not speak in our language. It speaks in ice, in wind, in silence. And when the Earth decides it is time for the cold to return, no civilization can talk it out of it. No wall, no technology, no border can hold back a glacier when it begins to move. And perhaps the most unsettling truth is this: the Earth does not need to destroy us to continue. It only needs to return to its rhythm. We are the interval. When the cold returns, it does not arrive like a storm. It arrives as silence. First, the seas begin to change. Warm currents that once climbed the coasts of continents start to slow. The ocean darkens. The air grows drier. Seasons stretch. Winters stop ending. Snow lingers where it once melted. What was once the exception quietly becomes the rule. The landscape shifts slowly until suddenly it does not. Forests retreat century by century, then decade by decade, and then, within a single generation, whole fields are swallowed by tundra. Animals that were once common become ghosts. Rivers freeze in silence. Lakes become mirrors. And the world we believed eternal reveals its true nature. Nothing here is fixed. Everything here is transition. Cities built along the sea confront not only the rising of waters, but their abrupt withdrawal. The earth breathes through water. When ice melts, the oceans advance. When ice returns, they retreat. Harbors sink. Later, they rise again, exposed like skeletons of forgotten stone. Entire civilizations have vanished this way not by war, but by climate. Glaciers do not advance like waves. They push. They drag. They carry mountains, rivers, valleys, rock, and time. Everything in their path is ground, lifted, rewritten. Modern cities, even with concrete, iron, glass, light, steel, are fragile before miles of ice moving with the weight of continents. Humanity likes to believe it shapes the world. But in the presence of a glacier we are sand. When cold dominates, life does not end. It transforms. The earth does not destroy, it reorganizes. Species disappear, but others emerge. With each deep freeze, with each cycle of quiet, life becomes harder, stranger, more inventive. We are descendants of those who adapted, not those who resisted. And the world may be calling for adaptation once more. The return of the cold is not the end of life. But it may be the end of a certain form of life. The form we know. The form we call civilization. The form that believed it had mastered the earth. The earth breathes. The earth pulses. The earth changes. And today, while we debate temperatures, climate charts, and future projections, something far deeper is unfolding. Something that does not fit inside numbers. Something that can only be felt in the quiet between seasons. The Great Glacier is not an enemy. It is a return. A reminder that the planet is alive and that we are only a moment within it. If you felt this, if something inside you recognized this silent call, then you are one of those who remember. The earth does not shout. It whispers. Through us, through wind, through stillness. We are not apart from this planet, we are made of it. We are its memory in motion. Its breath wearing a human face. And if we listen, truly listen, we may learn how to continue. Come now. I hear the earth breathing. Tell me where in the world you are hearing this whisper from. I want to know how far the planet's memory reaches. And if you are not yet subscribed, subscribe to Cloaked Mysteries. Here we don't just share facts. We unveil what has always been hidden. Until the next descent. Arthenox, signing off. Silence.